Thank you. That kind of goes with this excellent question. Are there any examples outside Canada where social movements, public pressures were able to get state security agencies to abandon a listing or the list entirely?
Maybe that's a really good question. I don't have universal knowledge around, whether or not this has ever happened. What I can say is that there's been studies over the last years that these types of administrative counterterrorism laws are proliferating at an even greater pace. So there may be instances where people have mobilized to undo some of the negative impacts or to rescind these kinds of laws. But in fact, what we're seeing is that more and more governments are turning away from using the criminal code, where charges need to be laid and evidence presented, to using preventative administrative proceedings in order to list people, in order to deny them access at the border, in order to block them from accessing funds. There's a really great report that was put out by the previous UN Special Rapporteur on counterterrorism and human rights, on the impacts of counterterrorism laws on civic space. And I'll put a link in the chat, and I'm not sure if we can share that with everybody, but I'll look it up, and maybe it can be shared afterwards. And the new special rapporteur is actually looking to engage in a study internationally on this, but it's certainly a growing concern, and we've seen it, in Israel, in India, in the United States, in Germany, in the UK, where these lists are proliferating, and the use of administrative tools to essentially create these kinds of chills on dissent and freedom of expression are being used in the name of countering terrorism and protecting national security.
Thanks. And I think we've seen an exerted effort to try and add UNRWA to that list recently, which was quite scary. We have a question about Samidoun specifically. Is there any, I don't know if any of you can comment on this, but are there community efforts to advocate for Samidoun, or at least to get them delisted, or some kind of effort in that regard?
I mean, I believe there are efforts happening. I'm not closely familiar with them, but I believe there are efforts out there, solidarity campaigns to try and support the delisting of the group. It's a difficult situation now, right? It's an extremely sensitive situation, and that's what the state wants. They want people to be apprehensive. You kind of you cut at the heart of these groups, right? Is through this listing process and making people nervous to get involved with any kind of efforts or speech around trying to think critically and encourage discussion about the listing and whether it should have happened in the first place. So I think there are things underway, but there's challenges with those as well, right?
We have a question about advocacy to place an entity, I guess, on the list in this regard. Can Palestinians in Gaza, West Bank, East Jerusalem, or can Canadians petition the Canadian government to list the IDF, for example, the pager attacks that would constitute, under Canada's own very vague definition of terrorism, as a terrorist attack? Can civil society participate in this process?
If I can respond to that one, this is my position specifically, and I don't know what my co-panelists think. I just think it's very dangerous to, politicize what is already this very politicized listing process even further, because essentially where other groups who are rightly, the subject of terrorism, violence, genocide, whatever it is, from these odious groups, by listing them, it just legitimizes the lists themselves. And I think that when we're looking at, for example, with the JNF, it's the recent confirmation of the revocation of charitable status. That's an administrative process that can be challenged. There's an adversarial process to deal with it, but it obviously hobbles its ability to do what it's trying to do. So I think there's other measures to address the problematic nature of some of these charities and organizations. But for me personally, it's very a dangerous thing to enhance the legitimacy of the list by advocating for more organizations to be listed.
I would concur with Yavar on that. It's going to the same state that is leading this kind of racist, repressive campaign and asking them to, help, right? In some way, right? In this kind of broad sense of the word. Yeah, I mean, the Patriot attacks, they were terrorism. I mean, even Leon Panetta, the former director of AA, came out and described them as such. But I think that there's ways for us to organize without having reliance on the state and trying to use these highly problematic systems.
Yeah, we have a few questions about, the extent of like social media posts being used. But Tim, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I was just going to say I agree completely, and there's also the issue that just the likelihood of such a campaign resulting in the government listing of foreign military, even though the IRGC in Iran is now listed, and that's actually raised a whole slew of concerns that people who are conscripted into a military service and may not have participated in any, and may eventually be conscientious objectors or then go on to oppose the state would actually still be considered members of a terrorist organization. So it can have these knock-on effects. And also there were several organizations, including groups in the Muslim community, who opposed, several years ago when the list was being used to list white supremacist organizations under the basis and the recognition that, as Shane was saying, that the government may now be symbolically adding some of these groups, but the vast majority of the groups listed and the ways it's used and will continue to be used is going to be in these detrimental ways, and that we can't trust also, even if you were to place your trust in the current government that they are acting for the right reasons, that the next government wouldn't use this as justification to continue using the list in ways that we've been fighting against. Yeah. So sorry, Sarah, I didn't want to interrupt the.
No, I